inspired by kingdom principles that work for you.
Upward, onward together as a part of RBNTV. My name is Carey and I'm delighted to join you in this important and relevant discussion. In a few weeks, U.S. citizens will go to the polls and vote in an exercise of their democratic rights. Two septuagenarians, President Donald Trump and Vice President Joe Biden, lead the Republican and Democratic tickets. In every election, political pundits claim that it is the most important election of our lifetime. But this presidential election is particularly unique and set in an unprecedented context. The election sits against the backdrop of the president himself hospitalized with COVID-19. The global pandemic has claimed over 200,000 American lives and over 1 million worldwide. The economic fallout and unemployment have been astounding. Streets across the country have convulsed in protest to the killings of African Americans by the police and in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. In a few weeks, we will find out who will lead the United States in the next 4 years during these tumultuous times. So to discuss this and more, we're pleased to welcome two guests from the Republican and Democratic points of view. First, we welcome Christophe Lirola. He is a portfolio manager at a family office based in Florida. He's been involved in numerous national and local Republican campaigns in the past, but he does not work for the Trump campaign. We also welcome Paul Berry. Paul is a tech firm executive, local leader, and governor's appointee from Reston, Virginia. He's currently chairman of the Virginia Latino Advisory Board, and in 2019, he was recognized by proclamation by the Senate of Virginia for his accomplishments statewide. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us in Forward, Upward, Onward together. We're honored to have you, and thank you so much again for spending some time just discussing with us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carey.
So first of all, let's jump in. Just last week, we watched really a remarkable debate, and it's remarkable. I wanted to first hear from you, Christophe, your thoughts on the debate. How do you think that President Trump performed in this first debate in this election cycle?
Carey, I'm going to have to be honest. The New York Yankees were playing at the same time as that debate, and I had a very tough time watching more than 10 minutes of it straight through. So I did not probably watch 20% of it simply because, and I've heard, expletives used to describe how it all happened, simply because it was just so appalling to watch. But I do think that the criticism from the general media when I say general media, I would say 80% of the cable news networks and print news, that, it was really the president's fault that this turned out to be an expletive show, if you will. The way I saw it was, it just looked like two old angry men yelling at each other, and it was very difficult to watch. And I think the American people were general losers of it. As far as the president's performance goes, I mean, there were certain times where I wish he would have. There were certain times where he could have probably landed some harder blows, particularly on the reluctance of Joe Biden to make a point on whether or not he would support court packing in the case that Amy Coney Barrett would be confirmed. I believe Biden missed his chances as well in certain cases, but I don't believe the American public came out with a clear winner, and I'm very frank about that.
Yeah, I'm sure that the Yankees game was definitely a bit more edifying than watching the performance on Tuesday. Paul, did you have a chance to watch it, or were you watching baseball as well?
No, I always prefer to I always opt into the greatest sport that we have, in Virginia, which is politics. I definitely did watch the entire debate. I have my own personal feelings about how the debate went and how the president acted and how Joe Biden performed. But you don't really need my personal opinion to know what the results were. The American people spoke for themselves. Poll after the debate was conducted from serious, methodical outlets, found the American people responded and said, Joe Biden won. It was a very clear message in terms of the number of support that came out on the vice president's side after the debate. But you can always catch the highlights on any of the late night comedy shows, because that was what the president's message was all about. You know, Joe Biden said it best, and I hate using this word for a sitting U.S. president, but he said, "You're a clown, man." And the American people picked up on that. The debate was between somebody who is an experienced, seasoned legislator turned vice president, who's handled real crises with acumen and grace, and a guy who used to be on TV, you know, on The Apprentice and reality TV. He's the so-called king of debt. He has, you know, we just found out that he only paid $750 in taxes, unless he wants to turn over his taxes, which he refuses to do. And when you combine that all together and you try to put it on a debate stage, is anyone really surprised that we saw what we saw on the debate night? Chris Wallace is a respected, experienced moderator of presidential debates. It's not like, you know, Team Blue, the Democrats, handpicked him. He's a Fox News anchor. So if anything, Joe Biden was going into unfamiliar territory in that debate stage with the moderator. But I respect Chris Wallace, and I think he's an excellent middle of the road type of guy. But he couldn't even control an uncontrollable, chaotic president. But again, are we all really surprised about that? Look at the past 3.5 years. This is Donald Trump at his purest form. The difference at the debate was that he wasn't being surrounded by people who were telling him that everything was all right and that everything he was doing was correct. He was challenged in front of the American people.
Yeah, I think that the debate, it does speak for itself, and while I think that the polls were, we were able to see one candidate over the next, against the next. I'm not sure if we necessarily saw, a clearer picture, or if someone left there unclear, that they definitely became that much more, understood the positions that much more. And maybe that was a function of the moderators. But I do want to mention some critical points that, just to talk about. You spoke that Joe Biden was able to look at crises over his 47-year Senate period, and as well during his time as vice president as well. And we're in the crisis of our times during COVID-19. As I said earlier, the president himself has been hospitalized, and we're in a major, not just national, but a global crisis in the coronavirus and in COVID-19. And, Christophe, do you think that the Republicans and President Trump are worthy of a second term, based on the performance and the policies, instituted as a result of the coronavirus and COVID-19?
Well, I want to just address a couple of points Paul made in terms of, first of all, polling post-debate. These are snap polls, they're focus groups, they're highly inaccurate. No one really knows. If you look back at 2016, Hillary Clinton was dominant according to every news outlet in pretty much every debate, and we know that didn't turn out very well at the end. In terms of the $750 tax allegation, I still have yet to see any hard evidence that is actually the case. And the one bit of hard evidence that was disclosed by Rachel Maddow years ago showed that he did in fact pay far more in taxes than that. We don't really know what the sources are there. This president has seen reporting after reporting from anonymous source after anonymous source. I would just warn the viewers to be very skeptical before they believe the mainstream media on anything related to Trump and his finances and his family or anything like that at this point, given that many of these allegations have been debunked time and again. As far as the COVID-19 pandemic goes, I think there's this general view on the left that the president is more or less responsible for the amount of death and destruction caused by a virus which originated in Wuhan, China. I want to go back and read a quote that was in front of me from January by the WHO. Preliminary investigations have found that no clear human-to-human transmission caused by the virus. February 3rd, the WHO also came out and said no reason to institute any kind of travel bans. Late March, You have the mayor of New York City telling people effectively there's nothing to worry about. In early March, Nancy Pelosi had her famous Chinatown interview where she basically encouraged people to go out, be out and about. The mainstream media was downplaying the virus. It wasn't Trump. The fact of the matter is we did not know enough about it because we were misled by those who did for a very, very long time. As far as the response since then, testing has gone up 30-fold since the start of the pandemic. Operation Warp Speed, which aims to provide 300 million doses of the vaccine by early January. We have 5 different vaccines at this point in phase 3 clinical trials, which is the final stage before approval is granted. And in terms of real clear policy by the opposition, I don't see that same clear policy at all. In fact, we're looking at here two different roads. We're looking at action versus words and promises and no specifics. The Joe Biden has said he'd like to institute a national mask mandate. Well, and then he walked back that exact claim, saying he wasn't even sure if the president even had constitutional authority to impose such mandates. The fact of the matter is the United States was in a booming economy before this pandemic hit. It was a very unfortunate pandemic caused by outside forces that no developed country in the world, no country as in general has been spared by. So to say that to make it seem like a verdict on this president that this happened, make it seem basically like he caused it, that to me is very problematic. And I think eventually the American people will see, and we're starting to see again with falling unemployment numbers, with the economy, with the economic recovery going far faster than anyone predicted, that this president does deserve at least 4 more years on that front. You can hate the style, you can hate the substance, but the results have been there.
So Paul, I have a follow-up question to you based on what Christophe said, and that it's, the numbers really have not been an indictment on President Trump and the Republicans, and really question that Joe Biden would have been able to do a better job. What do you say?
Well, I appreciate that Christophe is making several points. I wouldn't necessarily call them germane. The indirectness of those facts is up for debate, of course. But here are some other numbers. The United States has 4% of the world's population, but over 20% of the COVID-19 deaths. Yes, no other developed nation has been spared from this, but those other developed nations have put into place policies and action that could have been part of a plan here, but were not. Trump lied to the American people and downplayed the coronavirus for months, and now over 200,000 Americans are dead. Those lies have had real consequences. He's on tape. Bob Woodward has Trump on tape saying he didn't want to cause a panic. But the American people didn't panic. They were looking for leadership. The only person that panicked was the president. For the families of those 200,000 lost loved ones, 7 million Americans have been infected, and more than 13 million are unemployed. But the recovery is actually slowing right now. Trump is on track right now to be the worst jobs president in American history. No other recession has been as bad as this. And yes, no one is claiming on either side that President Trump caused the virus. But you know what he didn't make go viral? His leadership, his empathy, his presence and demeanor. Those are the things that the American people needed most, and that was completely absent. What Joe Biden is bringing is direct, relevant experience from the avian flu, where he didn't rely on the outside organizations that my friend here mentioned. He didn't rely on everyone else's actions. He said, what needs to be done? 16,000 Americans died during that pandemic. That was that is a testament to the ability, one-to-one comparison of a response by centralized government to say this is an issue and we need to step in here, compared to what is happening now, where again, Trump is on tape. He's admitted that he knew what was going on, but he said it's a miracle in public. Whenever he's on camera, he's saying it's going to disappear. There's only 15 people. Those are the types of things, those actions and that inaction has led to hundreds of thousands of deaths, and they're still happening. The state of Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, outside of major population centers, it's hit every single corner of the United States, and President Trump still doesn't have a plan to address it. And what's worse,
I must say, go ahead.
Final point for this response is that what's worse is that he not only doesn't have a plan still, he's relying on governors, and he's suing in the Supreme Court to take away protections of the Affordable Care Act. People's health insurance and their ability to pay for health care or for pre-existing conditions are on the line, and Trump is actively trying to take those away from people. 133 million Americans are at risk right now of losing their health insurance because of his actions.
Well, I do want to say, we definitely wish the president and first lady well as they recover. Christophe, it sounds as if you have a rebuttal.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few there. I'll take the last point because it's the freshest one. On the pre-existing conditions, the president just last week or weeks ago signed an executive order specifically stating that any kind of healthcare legislation that crosses his desk must have protection for pre-existing conditions. That was signed. That's an action. That was done. So that to me is just, I don't see where you can get the assumption that he's trying to just remove people's healthcare based on pre-existing conditions. I tried to jot down a few points here. I believe you said I believe it was the swine flu, H1N1 flu, 14,000 deaths or so. The fact is that was a far less deadly disease. The science of the disease is what dictated that outcome. I think if you had taken COVID-19 and put it in that situation where we had that kind of response, where there was absolutely no social distancing, absolutely. I remember, I believe I was in college at the time, and parties were still going on. People were still drinking out of each other's beers, and I think that you really can't. You're not even comparing apples to oranges at that point. You're comparing nuts to palm trees. In terms of stating that this recession is the worst one in our nation's history, and no recession that I can remember. If I'm not mistaken, this may not even. It'd be very hard to. It almost didn't fit the technical definition of a recession because you're going to see quarter-to-quarter economic growth 2 quarters later. It was a snap. I mean, sure, I guess the economists could call it that, but if you're talking about millions of jobs being added in the last 2 months of the year, quarter-to-quarter growth being something outrageous, like 5%. I have a hard time with that characterization, calling this guy the Great Depression precedent, when before this pandemic, we had the lowest unemployment rate in 55 years and GDP growth just under 3%.
And so, Christophe, I did want to discuss the economy. Pre-pandemic, the U.S. economy, based on the studies that I've read, was able to grow 2% annually. It was under 1.4% under Obama. One could argue that Obama was pulling the economy out of the Great Recession. But we have faced millions of jobs that were lost during the COVID, what analysts are now calling the COVID recession. The unemployment rate is now at 7.9%. U.S. jobs were added 661,000 jobs in September. And so we're seeing a rebound. But many analysts on both sides of the aisle are saying that the rebound is indeed slowing. So what does the economic rebound look like under a possible President Biden, you think, Paul?
Well, again, you don't have to take my word for it. Goldman Sachs just published an analysis of comparing the two plans that each presidential candidate has put out. They looked at the Trump jobs plan for the future, and they looked at the Biden jobs plan. The Biden jobs plan, according to Goldman Sachs, this is not exactly they are a methodical, well-run, lean towards a certain type of analysis that takes a good financial approach. Goldman Sachs is saying that Joe Biden's plan is going to create 7 million more jobs. Those jobs are going to come in a variety of manufacturing, green economy sector, technology, like those kinds of jobs that are now driving the new collar economy. Do you know what the average salary of a coal miner is? And the average nationwide, it's $105,000. That sector is absolutely critical to our nation's energy energy needs. I'm not saying anything about reducing coal, but that sector has been tuned into technology to accomplish what it needs to accomplish as an industry for a long time. Joe Biden's plan is saying, let's do more of that. Let's double down on creating tech jobs and green sector jobs. And that together, along with the other manufacturing and reducing the overseas production of a lot of our goods and services, that creates 7 million jobs. That's 7 million more than President Trump has proposed under his plan. So again, I'll let those numbers just speak for themselves.
Christophe, we're seeing a rebound, not as quick as many and Trump himself would have liked to have seen right now. We've, a lot of analysts have spoken about a sharp V-like rebound, and we're not quite seeing that. What do you think the rebound is going to look like under a potential second term?
Well, I want to address one point. Paul, my friend, did cite the Goldman Sachs report by David Costin, I believe it was, the chief U.S. economist. What he didn't mention was that Goldman Sachs also predicted that a Democratic sweep and Joe Biden presidency would likely cut S&P earnings by 12%. In terms of what a Trump versus Biden plan would look like, well, you can take both candidates' words for them. Taxes will go up generally and more or less across the board. I know Joe Biden likes to say that only the rich will pay more, that only those making 400K or more will see their taxes increased. The problem with that statement is that in many cases, those making that 400 to 500 to 600K level are sole proprietors of businesses that are going to have to let folks go in order to meet their payrolls. So it's effectively and the Tax Foundation has come up with their own numbers that state that in a period of 10 years, Joe Biden's tax plan would shrink GDP by 1.4%. And the increases to revenue over that period are very marginal. We're talking about $3 trillion over a span of 12 years, which doesn't do anything to address much in terms of the deficit, which we all know will take far bigger, far steeper cuts that I'm not sure either party is ready for. But that's a whole other subject. In terms of Trump's plan well, we know what Trump's economic plan is. For the future, as well as what he's done in the past. We've seen the rise of economic opportunity zones, which have largely increased investment in not only in the most ignored portions of our economy. We've also seen the direct benefits of the TCJA and the removal of certain deductions that were simply unfair, and the continued removal of business regulations, which were job killing. So the president plans to build on that. Another key point we forget about with Joe Biden's plan is he wants to raise the corporate rate back up to 28%. Raising the corporate rate back up to 28% would put us above the average of the European Union. It would put us right next to France. It would put us well above China. It would incentivize companies to leave. And that is something we do not want to do.
So let me, Paul, you mentioned an interesting point about President Trump's empowerment and seeking to further empower minorities through economic expansion. And one of the things that President Trump has definitely touted is that, many African-American jobs have been developed and created under his watch. To that end, though, many African Americans and minorities are also looking to him for unity during very troubling times. I first spoke about the police shootings of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and several others. What does the uniter-in-chief look like under President Biden, you think, Paul?
Well, definitely the opposite of whatever we're calling President Trump. Joe Biden was a civil rights lawyer that then was selected by the first Black American to assume the United States presidency. I've been in the room where Joe Biden told this story where he called his mom after he got a call from the Democratic nominee for president, Barack Obama, Senator Obama then, and he was telling his mom that, I don't know if I should do this, should I accept the vice president? And what his mom said? His mom said, you fought your entire life for civil rights so that every single American could be on an equal footing, whether it was on the job, at home, in their neighborhoods, civic associations, wherever it is. You fought your entire life, and now you're asking yourself if you should accept the vice presidential nomination from the first Black American who's going to be our next president. That's who Joe Biden is. Joe Biden is going to bring us together. On top of that, he selected the first female Indian and Black American to be his vice presidential nominee. He's worked his entire life to make things better for all Americans. Go, look at any of his statements for years and years and years, where he's saying, I don't want to be a nominee for Senate or the vice president, whatever the office was that he was seeking, for Democrats or Republicans, for all Americans. That's his character. That's who he is. So, I'm excited to see a Vice President Biden become a President Biden with Vice President Kamala Harris at his side to look at our problems right now, especially around racism, and have the uncomfortable conversation that's going to make things better for everyone, not just one party or the other.
Christophe, many have looked to President Trump for a degree of empathy, for a strong denunciation of white supremacy. And he's been it has been alleged that he has been rather lukewarm in that regard. What do you think a second term will look like in terms of uniting the country around race relations?
Well, I'd like to say there's no doubt that there needs to be more unity. It's also clear that there needs to be acknowledgement from the white community that there is a clear presence of systemic racism in this country, and that it's been around for a very long time, and that it absolutely needs to be addressed. And I completely agree that uncomfortable conversations, Paul, you hit the nail on the head, need to be had. And to be frank, I do wish the president was more clear in enunciating that 100%. That being said, I think we're giving Joe Biden a little bit of a pass here. We can't forget about the 1994 crime bill he authored, which extended the death penalty to 60 new crimes, stiffened sentences for drug offenses, which disproportionately affect minority communities. And we also aren't giving the president enough credit for the things he has done for minority communities as well. And if we're being fair, Joe Biden in his 40 years of government never passed anything close to what the First Step Act accomplished in terms of mandatory minimums, in terms of drug offenses, in terms of commutations for people who frankly are in jail because of that 1994 crime bill, who were released because of the First Step Act. If I'm looking at, I also do think with this conversation, we do need to be careful. I know Joe Biden has proposed an extension of community-oriented policing programs. However, community-oriented policing programs can be used in many cases to significantly decrease very needed police budgets. And that's why you're seeing a big debate in terms of, don't defund the police versus defund the police. But overall, I do think both sides need to do a much better job of having this very difficult conversation and acknowledging the problems. I am driven crazy by Republican friends of mine who don't acknowledge that it is a problem, who deny that systemic racism is a problem. Again, I don't work for the campaign. I don't work for the National Party. And it's an issue that bothers me, frankly, as someone who grew up in New York City and saw systemic racism on a daily basis. That being said, I do think we're being a little harsh on the president, who did enact policies that led to record low unemployment for African Americans. And the fact of the matter is that the First Step Act was a very landmark piece of legislation that the president does not get enough credit for. And finally, on one front, as a recovering addict myself, the fight that this president has put up in terms of fighting the disease of addiction, which also in a disproportionate way affects minority communities, in terms of the 1.8 billion in funding, the initiatives to help convicted criminals get back to work. I think we can find more agreement on this topic than many others, at least for me.
I think you're right that there's a whole lot of common ground that we can find on the topic of race relations, and the more uncomfortable conversations that we have, unfortunately, the better we'll be. As we started out, these are definitely unique times that we're in, and so close to election, there was a death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the Supreme Court Justice, and President Trump's appointment of Judge Amy Coney Barrett has certainly rankled many on both sides of the aisle. And so I just wanted your thoughts on, the appointment of Judge Barrett. Christophe, you can start first. Is this a worthy pick? And second, do you think that given the precedent that was set in 2016, that we should move ahead with Senate hearings?
Well, I think even Democrats, many of them, will reluctantly admit that she is certainly qualified and very worthy of the position, regardless of whether philosophically you agree with every ruling or every opinion she's ever put out or not, especially if you look at the faculty at Notre Dame, which has almost universally praised her, as well as numerous other legal scholars who know her well. There's no doubt that she's qualified. So I think we put that one to bed. Whether or not
she has sterling credentials, and so she's certainly. And I rephrase my point that we're using the word worthy, but sure. It's based on the circumstances. Her appointment. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, the key differentiation that we're forgetting here with the Merrick Garland situation was that the Democrats did not have control of the Senate at the time. Republicans did. And the Republicans had won that majority 2 years prior. In this case, the Republican majority was expanded in 2018. And we're also forgetting the point that President Obama did, in fact, nominate Merrick Garland. It was the Senate that chose not to give him the hearing or to put him through or to confirm him, rather, would be the right word. So the president followed what every president effectively has done. He nominated a justice. Now it's up to the Senate. So the criticism here isn't, it shouldn't be, well, the president should not have even nominated. He should have waited for the end of his election. I don't know. I find that argument very difficult. I also don't believe if Democrats were wearing the same shoes, they would have done the same thing. Unfortunately, it's a very uncomfortable conversation. It is one that does bring up a point, however, in terms of threats from Democrats to pack the court, a la FDR, when he attempted to do so as president. And we haven't gotten clarity from Joe Biden on that. I would like to get some clarity on whether or not he supports packing the court, because that to me would be a dangerous precedent that Ruth Bader Ginsburg herself warned against. So when you turn the Supreme Court into a legislative body, that's when things get kind of hairy. We need to make sure that the court stays independent. And I believe the president was well within his right to make this nomination of a very, very qualified judge.
Well,
so Christophe, I promise I'm not attacking you personally, but those lines of thought couldn't be more dangerous and, mentioning spurious logical reasoning. The fact is that President Trump is the leader of the Republican Party. He's also the leader of the American people. And we look up to him to set an example, not just in our everyday lives, but in our three branches of government. The buck stops with him, or at least it should. In his own words, at a press conference in the Rose Garden, in front of the American people, he said, "I take no responsibility," in reference to the coronavirus. Those words cannot be louder in my head right now when I'm considering the series of events that he is participating in as a willing co-conspirator with the leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell refused to give hearings to a qualified judge that 98-2 votes was confirmed by the Senate to sit on the DC circuit. Mitch McConnell himself voted in favor to approve the nomination of Merrick Garland to the DC circuit. Yet when it comes down to it, he didn't want a a Democratic president to have a fair hearing. His reasoning, and this is where it becomes spurious, from the points that you made, is that Mitch McConnell said the American people deserve to we deserve to hear from them first about who they want as their president, and that person should make the nomination. But when it comes down to it, to be honest with his colleagues in the Senate and with the president and the American people, Donald Trump is working with a Republican Senate to advance the rules of the road that they want for themselves, but they're not willing to have everybody else play by. And why does that matter? That matters because, again, we're looking for leadership and examples. And right now, good examples that we can live our own lives by, and we're not finding that. So when you say that, this is kind of out of Trump's hands, he's walking hand in hand with a set of individuals that want to play by their own rules. So when Joe Biden, I too would love to have a straight answer about expanding the Supreme Court to have new justices. When it comes down to it, is it okay for us to break precedent in the Senate and end things like the filibuster and expand the court and add new states to disenfranchise voters in the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico on the fly as we confront these new situations? Will it be okay for Democratic Senate to do that? Or is it only okay for President Trump and Mitch McConnell to upend the rules when it's convenient for them? I think that we should all be playing by the same rules. I think Joe Biden believes that, and everyone else, needs to acknowledge that the hypocrisy, the true definitional hypocrisy of the Republican-led Senate and Trump's complicity in that process.
I'm just struggling with which rules are being upended here. The Constitution clearly states the president nominates the justice, and the justice is then confirmed by the Senate.
Interpret the rule when it's convenient for him one way, and then when it's inconvenient for him to interpret them in the same way, a la Merrick Garland, he's choosing to ignore the rule book. He doesn't want to. Go
ahead. Sorry, I'll let you finish your point, Paul.
No, it's I want Mitch McConnell to treat nominees the same way. What does it matter if Barack Obama nominated someone and then he chose not to take him up?
Well, we're not treated. We never. I mean, there's numerous nominees for different positions that have different confirmation votes. I mean, Bill Barr was also unanimously approved his first time around as Attorney General. Second time around, we all saw what happened. It got very ugly very quickly. Again, I think we're forgetting the fact that in Merrick Garland's case, Democrats did not have the Senate majority. They had lost it 2 years prior.
Gentlemen, we are unfortunately just about out of time. There may be some undecided voters there. And so I want you to have the last word with them, why they should elect President Donald Trump or Vice President Biden. So Christophe, I'll let you go first. We have 1 minute. If you'd like to share why President Trump deserves a second term.
Substance over style for me always wins. Results over style always wins. I'm an economy first voter, like many of those in this country, and I believe that the results speak for themselves, particularly where we were prior to this pandemic. I trust that the president created the best economy we've probably ever seen and will ever see in our lifetime, and I think he is best positioned to do it again.
So, Paul, tell us, why should the American public elect Vice President Joe Biden as president in the upcoming election?
Joe Biden is going to be an American president for everybody. He's not focused on one party or the other, one set of values or one set of beliefs. He's going to bring this country back together in a way that we need most at this very moment. Maya Angelou said, when someone reveals their character to you, believe them. I'm looking at our current leadership right now in Washington, D.C., in the White House and the Senate, and I don't like the character that I'm seeing there. Despite what they say, how they try to spin their actions, we see at the end of the day in the American households, kitchen table issues that are being impacted by that lack of leadership. So I encourage everybody to go to iwillvote.com if you're an American watching this and figure out a way to vote. But if you're undecided, I'd say just turn on the TV whenever Trump is talking and make your decision for yourself.
Gentlemen, again, thank you very much for joining us in Forward, Upward, Onward together. We could sit here for another 2-3 hours talking through the issues. There's so much to discuss. and unpack. I appreciate your time. And to our viewing audience, thank you very much for watching us at Forward, Upward, Onward Together as a part of RBNTV. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Again, thank you very much, and see you next week.
You're watching RBNTV. We are networking, promoting, we're scoring points for you, proclaiming, declaring, here to encourage you. No matter the problem, we will enlighten you. We hear you, please listen. There is a point of